Welcome back to another episode of Required Reading, where today we're going to continue our read of the novelization of the movie Gremlins, written by George Gipe. This is Chapter 6. Somehow, Billy got through the rest of the workday, the worst part of which was the succession of triumphant leers from Gerald Hopkins every time their paths crossed. Barney fell asleep under the counter and was good as gold until lunchtime, when Billy took him home. Mr. Corbin went to a luncheon given by the Tri-County Businessmen's Association and didn't return until nearly 4 o'clock. He seemed to have forgotten the incident involving Barney and Mrs. Deagle. Kate, as beautiful as ever, was Billy's only continuing source of visual and, as he contemplated asking for a date soon, mental pleasure. By closing, he was in a better frame of mind, although he did not relish the idea of walking everywhere until his car decided to let him rejoin the human race. On the other hand, walking at Christmas time was pleasant, in that the town was colorfully decorated, and most people seemed in happy moods. Kingston Falls' main square was lined with lights when Billy closed the bank door behind him and started home. His plan was to mosey along, looking in store windows in the hope he would see something different and interesting for Mom or Dad. In recent years, they had become tough cases as far as Christmas shopping went. Mom claiming she needed nothing, but she was always delighted when package opening time came. Dad, of course, either had everything or was in the process of inventing it. He enjoyed the thought behind a nice present, though. Crossing the town square, Billy walked among the rows of Christmas trees, enjoying their fresh pine smell. His mind still preoccupied with the day's turbulent events. He was the perfect target for Pete Fontaine's joke. Dressed as a Christmas tree, complete with blinking lights, dangling ornaments, and silver tinsel, 13-year-old Pete stood perfectly still near the other trees until Billy was inches away, then reached out and grabbed his arm. Billy jumped. "Hi, Billy," Pete laughed. "Gotcha, huh?" Billy laughed. "Yeah, I guess I was thinking about something else." He regarded Pete from head to toe. "How's business?" he asked. "Don't ask me," Pete shrugged. "Pop sells them. I just act like one." As they strolled along the edge of the tree-lined square, Pete dutifully recited his pitch whenever they approached a potential buyer. "Christmas trees, get 'em here," he called. "All sizes and shapes. Get one just like me." As a frozen-featured man walked quickly by, Pete added, "Hey there, sir. Bet you could use a Christmas tree, huh?" The man, staring at the ground, ignored him. "Bet he's got an aluminum one," Pete said in a loud voice, "or he puts lights on his cat." Billy smiled briefly until the cat reference made him think of Mrs. Deagle and her threat to destroy Barney. Was it possible for her life was so bitter she would actually consider doing such a thing? Pete's father, an exact replica of him with 30 years added on, gestured to his son. "Help Mr. Anderson load this onto a station wagon," he said. Billy grabbed the tall tree, and with Pete went to the car. Mr. Anderson, an elderly gentleman, opened the back, and they placed the tree inside. "Thanks, Billy," Pete said. A psychologist, looking at Pete's eyes and listening to the tone of his voice, would have known instantly that the young Pete was expressing gratitude for more than the tree errand. Now at the pimply-faced, gawky, and totally insecure stage, and filled with conviction that no one really liked him, least of all older teens, Pete's admiration of Billy verged on hero worship. He was the older kid who actually treated Pete like a human being. Not that his father was unkind to him, nor was he picked on by his contemporaries. They merely treated him like something that was just there. Billy, on the other hand, seemed interested in him. If he wanted to, Pete felt he could tell him a personal problem, ask his advice, and not be regarded as either a jerk or a potential social offender. Now, with business a bit slow and Billy at hand, Pete decided the time was right. "Hey, Billy," he said. You're pretty old. That's right, Billy smiled. I get my first retirement check next week. I mean, you got lots of experience, right? Experience with what? Well, with girls. Sure. You ever ask a girl out? Sure, that's usually the best way to go out with them, to ask. Yeah, Pete murmured. How'd you do it? What'd you say? Billy shrugged. It depends on the girl and the situation, he said, trying to sound worldly but not blasé. You gotta be firm, confident, make it sound like you're doing her a favor by asking her out. Really? Pete's eyes were wide and bright with this new piece of knowledge. Sure. You can't get all gushy and nervous. Never let on how much you really like her. I get it, Pete nodded. Maybe you should zap her with a few insults first. Billy laughed. That may be carrying it a bit too far. You got somebody in mind? No, not really, Pete lied, then amended himself. He said, maybe there's somebody. Billy laughed. He reached out, trying to find a place near Pete's shoulder to pat without getting jabbed by pine needles. Let me know how it turns out, he said. Yeah, Pete answered, waving as Billy stepped off the curb and headed down the block. Billy smiled, recalling their conversation as he walked. Why didn't life get easier? To Pete, he was wise and cool, capable of dealing with life in general and women in particular. To himself, he was hardly more proficient than at 13. Words still got twisted in his mouth and thoughts muddled in his brain before he could articulate them. And yet the very notion that Pete considered him worldly and wise buoyed his spirits to the point where he decided to drop into Dory's pub. It was unlikely that Kate would be there. She usually went home to change before reporting for work. Even if she didn't arrive before Billy finished a mug of beer, however, he considered it important to take the initial plunge of going inside. Once or twice in the past he had done so, but had emerged in a depressed mood after seeing the attention lavished on Kate by the older men at the bar. Not that she returned their overtures. She was friendly, even joked with them, but was never intimate. That should have pleased Billy. Instead, he concluded unhappily that if she rejected those sharp-tongued, sophisticated, successful men, what chance did he have? Tonight, he was determined to brave his own insecurity. Going inside, he stood at the entrance foyer, waiting for his eyes to adjust to the darkness. Laid out as an old-fashioned Irish pub, Dory's was dimly lit, with small wooden tables and sawdust on the floor. The long bar was already crowded with young and middle-aged men, as well as a scattering of women. In the corner, a pair of video games colorfully and noisily zapped aliens or threatened the player's electronic hero with instant fragmentation. Locating an empty table, Billy sat down, ordered a beer from none other than the sandy-haired Dory Dougal himself, the genuine Irishman who opened the pub. 10 minutes later, beginning to feel relaxed, he took out his drawing pad he always carried and began to sketch. Soon the lines evolved into recognizable forms, a muscular warrior battling a giant, horrifying dragon with a face too similar to Mrs. Deagle's to be mere coincidence. In the process, the warrior was defending a young princess with an uncanny resemblance to Kate Beringer. Despite the bad lighting, Billy was pleased with the results he had gotten and was admiring the effect when a sudden shadow following across the picture brought him back to reality. Terrific, a sardonic voice said. The world needs more unemployed artists. It was Gerald Hopkins. In deference to its being after hours, he had unfastened the two bottom buttons of his three-piece suit and loosened his tie slightly. Without being invited, he dropped into the chair opposite Billy and smiled in a superior manner. Speaking of unemployment, guess who almost applied for it today? I give up, Billy said coolly. You. Taking a long beat so it could sink in, he then continued. Mr. Corbin had second thoughts, though. He gets all sentimental about the holidays. Imagine that. Yeah, Gerald sneered. I would have fired you in a second. Merry Christmas to you, too, Billy deadpanned. You think it's mean of me to even think about firing somebody, right? Gerald demanded. Well, let me tell you something. It's a tough world out there. To get ahead, you have to be tougher. That's why I'm junior vice president at age 23. In 2 or 3 years, I'll have Mr. Corbin's job. And when I'm 30, I'll be a millionaire. When you're 30, you'll probably be only 28. Billy shrugged. Well, you have my blessing, Jer, he said evenly. Don't call me that. My name's Gerald. Sure, Jer. At that moment, Kate passed nearby with a tray and drinks, wearing an apron on which Dory's pub was emblazoned in large green letters. Gerald spun his head and snapped his fingers in her direction. With a tight smile, she moved to the table. I'll have an Irish coffee, Gerald ordered, but don't pour the Irish whiskey in the coffee. Bring it in a separate glass and I'll do it. Kate nodded, looked at Billy. You all right? She asked. Fine, he said. Glancing at the drawing in his lap, she turned her head sideways and smiled. Do I sense some hostility there? She murmured slyly. Hostility, but no talent, Gerald countered. I think it's good, Kate said. Then you're still into comic books, Gerald sneered. Billy, somewhat embarrassed by Kate's praise and intimidated by Hopkins' arrogance, tried to change the subject. He succeeded only in blurting an obvious statement that Gerald gleefully pounced on. I guess you're working tonight, he said to Kate. No, dummy, Gerald interjected. She's modeling aprons. Every weeknight, Kate said, ignoring him, so Dory won't have to pay an extra waitress. No pay? Dory's got to save as much money as he can or Mrs. Deagle will close down the place pretty soon. So everybody's pitching in to help. It's not a matter of keeping a job from someone else. If this place closes down, a lot of jobs will go. I think it's great, Billy said. It's dumb economically, Gerald muttered. If a business can't make it without help from charity, it deserves to go under. I'll get your Irish coffee, Kate said, turning to leave. Wait a minute, Gerald said in a softer tone. You don't have to get all bent out of shape because I'm practical. Actually, I think it's very nice you're doing this. Thank you, Kate replied. Gerald reached out to touch her arm. Hey, Kate, he said. You haven't seen my new apartment. I haven't seen your old apartment, she countered. That's right, he retorted. The lights were out. Seeing the fire in her eyes, Gerald laughed elaborately. Just kidding, he said. Well, why don't we have dinner tomorrow night, just the two of us? I'd love to, but I've got to work. Tell Dory you're sick. He won't be able to dock you. Kate smiled mirthlessly, shook her head no, and left. Gerald watched her with smoldering, lustful eyes. Then he looked at Billy in a conspiratorial manner. You think she's got something going with Dory? He asked. Dory? Billy laughed. He's in his 40s, maybe old enough to be her grandfather. Why else would she work for free? You ever hear of the Christmas spirit? Billy challenged. Only the kind that comes in a bottle, Gerald smiled. I'm sorry for you. Don't be. Billy swallowed the last of his beer, threw $1 on the table, and stood up. That's for Kate, he said. And thanks a lot for the drink, Jer. I told you never to... But Billy didn't hear the rest. He was already halfway to the door. As he reached out to push it open, he spotted Kate coming out of the back room and into the bar. She smiled warmly at him and winked. It was chilly outside, but during his walk home, Billy hardly felt it.